I had a financial advisor friend of mine. He's been in business 35 years. And the question he asked me was, well, Phil, what happens if the family can't get to any money and the kids really don't have
Mm-hmm.
money? Like the bodies that mom's there at the funeral home,
Mm-hmm.
no one's got any money or claims to not have any money. What happens?
It's hard, right? So most of my colleagues in funeral service will, if there is truly that family that does not, there's different scenarios, right? Mom has money, kids don't, um, and there's no access to the money, and maybe
Well, they,
mom
they were
has,
waiting for mom to pass away so
right,
they could have money.
right. But again, back to the original point, most funeral homes want to be paid, and rightfully so. The the challenge is when there is no money, we can resort to things like Department of Human Services as a solution, which nobody really is excited about going through. And quite honestly, it limits a ton to what's available to the family in terms of services.
It's almost like
That the
Medicaid, right?
It is. Funeral homes will typically lose a significant amount of money by performing those services, but are invested in the goodwill of the community. So as long as those claims are legit and a lot of my colleagues, again, heart is in this first before their wallet. They are business people, but they understand there are circumstances. So number one, I always say that the funeral professional in the room will try to in some way work with the county if that's a piece that they can help supplement. We're seeing funeral homes now suggest GoFundMe's. Uh, a lot of.
If you go, this is scary. If you go to GoFundMe
Mhm.
and you type in funeral or memorial, hundreds of thousands of active campaigns right now.
And we're seeing more and more of that. I don't want to say sometimes families feel embarrassed that they have to do that. And again, like a lot of time, it could be completely avoided. And not to mention that those types of organizations do take a percentage of those donations. Um, but what we're seeing is sometimes families aren't able to have honor the life that they would like to. And again, it doesn't mean that they want this full blown traditional funeral. It might be a cremation with a memorial service that the funeral home's involved in. That they have a celebration center in the back of their parking lot that the family is not churched. They can use this area. We're seeing a lot of funeral homes offer these types of gathering spaces that are not funeral home esque. They're cool and trendy and high ceilings and a place to gather, and they'll do weddings and showers and Lions Club meetings and open it up to community as a place of gathering. So those types of opportunities are being missed by families because, and the funeral home certainly can't give those services away for free.
Right.
So when families don't have access to money or they don't have available funds to, perform the services that they wish, sometimes the county will step in and provide some assistance that really is nowhere near going to cover expenses by any stretch of the imagination. Um, GoFundMe, they're having to ask Aunt Kathy, who owns 2,000 acres and has more money than she knows what to do with. It's that awkward conversation. Then Aunt Kathy's involved because she's the payer, right? But everyone asks Aunt Kathy for money, but now she's in charge, paying. But now the funeral director is in a weird spot because he or she might have to follow next of kin laws of who's in charge of the funeral, of what they can do. But now Kathy's paying, so Kathy feels like she's in charge, but legally
Right.
she's really not. She's just paying for it. So it just creates so many scenarios that are, again, avoidable.
What about two other scenarios that people have brought up? One, there's like these short-term funeral funding companies, like a
Mm-hmm.
not like a payday loan, but they're like a short-term loan. You can go borrow money, or people used to do like some we call them collateral assignments, where they're like, hey, mom has this policy. Once we get the death certificates and file the claims in like 60 to 90 days, we should have some money we can pay you. Like, are those even options still acceptable today? And like, what's your
Short
opinion.
answer is yes. And yeah. So Lending USA is one example, right? Like they provide funding services for families. There's other companies out there, and they're extending monies to the funeral home on credit to the family. Typically, those are higher interest rates, right? That
Well, it's short term and
right.
probably minimal qualifications. So
Yeah, and probably in the eyes of that credit company, higher risk. So that's why they have
absolutely.
the opportunity to charge a higher interest rate. So they exist. I don't know too many folks in my network that offer them on the regular, but they are there and available. But is that the best route?
Well,
Like
it comes
for
back to
most,
you're
right?
leaving your family money. Why would you make them go through that process of paperwork, qualifying, the stress, higher interest rates, paying it back, when you could have just moved a little bit of money from your left pocket to right pocket into the beneficiary liquidity plan and solved it in advance?
Yeah, and the same goes for assignments, right? Like as we'll call them. Some funeral homes still accept those, but some will say, "Look, it's great that your mom had an insurance policy." Um, and we haven't even talked about some things that come into play when people have insurance policies, have planned and paid for years, and Medicaid comes into play, right? And they lose that insurance policy uh, to the nursing home for cost of care. Um, and why I always say like those types of policies should not be used for the funeral expenses. I'm 100% on board with people having life insurance. I am not on board with those life insurances policies being specifically earmarked for funeral care for the reasons we've just talked about. And this one in specifically, where funeral homes are less likely to accept an assignment at the time of arrangement, because you got to think about that funeral director. If I'm meeting that family and they say we have a $10,000 insurance policy that was earmarked for mom's funeral care, now I have to take a step back, go in the other room with maybe the beneficiaries there, maybe they are not, to verify the amounts of the funds in that policy. And the beneficiary has to give them permission to give me information on that policy. Then I have to do an assignment and hope that that beneficiary signs off on at the end of the day that assignment. And so it's a bit clunky, and I think funeral homes are realizing that, and it's costing family, and it's become clunky that there's actually even companies in funeral service that will take the insurance policy, front the funeral home the money, right? And they collect their 3%, their 4% on processing fees uh, to have the insurance assignment assigned to them. I'm not saying it's a bad service, but the family ultimately is giving up something. And in that form, if it's a $10,000 policy, it might be the 3% fee.
To me, it still comes back to where like the loved one that passed away, I can't imagine that the majority of the time they want their loved ones to go through these processes.
No,
they
that's
thought,
the whole thing.
I have money. When I die, they can get the money and everything's fine. They don't know that it's not available for 30, 60, 90 days or more.
Right.
And that somebody's having to have this stress of credit cards or borrow money from Aunt Kathy or collateral assigning if that's available, or these fast lending, like what the person that passed away envisioned was they're going to be celebrating my life. The family's going to come together and everything's going to be hunky dory. And the reality of it is, if someone hasn't planned ahead, it's typically going to be clunky.
It is. There's no doubt. And that's where, and it's not their fault that they don't know this, right? Like, and I'm not, it's not their fault that they think it's going to go this way. But that's why you and I and other BLP professionals are out there trying to kind of like clear the air, pull the veil back and say, this is reality. This is what happens. This is day to day. that I see with families, that you see with advisors successfully being able to fulfill these plans for families and seeing the look on their face. Maybe they didn't know mom had this BLP plan in place.
Right.
It's like, so it's not their fault that they don't know that these things exist. It's our mission to make sure that people know, both on the professional side and on the consumer side, that this exists, it's real. And these things that we're talking about today, the emotional, the financial, the legal, all exist every single time. Nothing goes perfect when someone dies. But I know, like I said before, they don't die differently in San Francisco than they do in Maryland and Detroit and Minnesota. And people don't feel differently emotionally when those people die. And there's always a cost associated with death. And no one would ever argue that having a plan and or financial a financial plan behind them when that death occurs is a bad idea.
Well, in a sense, especially since they don't make premium payments, so they're not buying anything.
Mm-hmm.
B, they've already earmarked some sort of asset or dollar for their family to use.
Mm-hmm.
C, it takes 5 to 10 minutes maximum to actually put the plan in place.
Right.
And it can be done over the phone because it's already their money.
Sure.
It's the simplest process I've seen. Oh, and they don't have to go to the funeral home and pick out everything in their service. I know that holds a lot of people back, John, is like, well, I don't want to go down to the funeral home. I don't want to have to, face this fact and pick out my urn or my casket or go through this. They don't have to do that with the beneficiary liquidity plan. I think we would both still recommend they have some process in place so that isn't 100% put on their family. But there's no reason they shouldn't go ahead and at least make sure the money is going to be there. Heaven forbid something happen sooner rather than later.
I'd 100% agree. And having, and that's where, Great Lakes can extend some additional services to families, right? If they, we work with the attorney here locally in Metro Detroit, and he or she says, look, everything is taken care of financially. We've talked about where we need to move this from one pocket to the other. We work with John and BLP to make sure that funds are available at the time of passing, and this is the best possible solution for you. And oh, by the way, our partner, Great Lakes, has, 10 funeral homes in our immediate service area that they and we would feel comfortable taking our parents to. Michelle O'Hara, right, my wife, who works at a funeral home here locally, if that family, and again, a suggestion, not a requirement,
right.
If that attorney says, hey, I'd like you to talk to John for 10 minutes because he wants to talk, it'd be probably a good idea to understand what goes along with the cremation that you've kind of talked about. And he's the funeral director. I'm not. Like, totally cool. Like, I love those conversations with families. And if we can get some of those things ironed out, that is well worth our time. So even connecting them with Michelle, like at Sullivan Funeral Directors in Utica and Royal Oak, Michigan. Michelle's the best at what she does. She's fantastic. So that attorney then, or that financial planner, trusts Michelle. It would be somebody that they would take their mother to. I would take my mom to. That those funeral directors there are and have been in the business for over 116 years. They're doing something right. They care about the communities. We would take our parents to them. If the family says, look, we don't have a funeral home of choice, and that sounds great. I'd love to meet Michelle and get the specifics of my cremation plan picked out. She's not going to sell you anything additional. The money's already there. And maybe that's the place where your folder and your wishes and your claim form for the BLP, for that matter.
Right.
And that can always change. If you move to Arizona because you're sick of the snow, cool. I will, and Sullivan's will find you that funeral home in Tempe that we would take our parents to. So yes, that's really how we're going to connect the dots, as I say, both we just don't want to get them into a beneficiary liquidity plan. It's we will then take it a step further. And this is for everybody. They call me. I don't care what organization you're from. If they need help, we're going to help them. And we're going to answer their questions about cremation and burial. to benefit them, because it's about creating the experience for that family and checking off those boxes, the emotional, the financial, and the legal aspects, and the unique circumstances of each life that we need to consider when planning.
I love that.